Hello everyone, and welcome to War in Middle-earth, a series where I take you through all of the major wars and conflicts throughout the history of Middle-earth, from the First Age to the Fourth Age. In this episode, we look at the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, also known as the Nirnaeth Arnoediad, or simply the Fifth Battle. In all the history of Middle-earth, no battle was bloodier than this one, and in the space of 6 days, nearly 500 years of warfare would be decided, and the vast majority of the losers would never return home again. We left off in the year of 462 of the First Age. 7 years earlier, Morgoth had won a great victory in the Battle of Sudden Flame, and he had spent the next few years attempting to press his advantage. But by 463, it seemed that Morgoth was once again on the back foot. That year, the Easterlings arrived in Beleriand from the eastern lands across the Blue Mountains. These men were mostly divided under two powerful chieftains, Bor and Ulthang, but both men swore fealty to the sons of Feanor, Bor to Maglor and Ulthang to Caranvir. This new strength of men helped replenish the diminished forces of the sons of Feanor. However, the real blow to Morgoth came in the years of 465 and 466. Those years saw the start and completion of the quest for the Silmaril, undertaken by Beren and Luthien and their allies. It would result in Sauron being driven from Minas Tirith, although it cost the life of King Finrod Felagund, who heroically sacrificed himself to save Beren, fulfilling his oath to Barahir. Yet the real loss for Morgoth was a Silmaril, which Beren cut from his very crown, proving that the Dark Lord of Angband was not invincible. If you haven't read the tale of Beren and Luthien, I highly recommend it. The success of Beren and Luthien raised the hopes of the Elves and the Edain, especially the hopes of Maedhros, the leader of the Sons of Feanor. He came to the rather obvious conclusion that Morgoth had emerged victorious during the Battle of Sudden Flame because he had been able to isolate and defeat his foes one by one. Under Maedhros' new theory of teamwork makes the dream work, the elves, men, and even dwarves of Beleriand would unite as one to defeat Morgoth for good, instead of waging separate wars. Thus, the Union of Maedhros was born. Across Beleriand, elves, men, and even dwarves rallied to join the Union of Maedhros. In the east, the Sons of Feanor gathered their own followers, including their newfound Easterling allies under Bor and Ulthang, and the dwarves of Belegost under King Azaghal. It's not clear whether the dwarves of Norgrod joined the battle, but we do know they supplied weapons and armour. In the west, High King Fingon, a close friend of Maedhros, eagerly joined, as did the strength of the House of Hador under their new lord, Hurin. Their allies included the elves of the Falas, led by Círdan, and the men of Brethil, led by Halmir, although he died of old age shortly afterwards and was replaced by his son, Haldir. However, there were notable exceptions to the union. Due to the deeds of Celegorm and Curufin and Nargothrond that indirectly led to Finrod's death, the new king Orodreth did not commit his army, and from Nargothrond only a small force came forth led by a Noldoran lord named Gwyndor, and from Doriath only two elves came forth, Mablung and Beleg, as King Fingal refused to fight alongside the Sons of Feanor, further cementing his status as a dick. As it turned out, the Sons of Feanor had a habit of pissing people off and were not overly good at diplomacy. By 469, the Union was complete and made ready to make their first moves. Across Beleriand, the Orcs were driven away or destroyed, and the Union was successful in retaking strategic locations, including Dorthonion, which had been under Morgoth's control for almost 15 years. However, Morgoth retaliated that same year, unleashing a plague on Beleriand, killing many of the Edain, especially those in Dor Loman. The board was reset, with Morgoth stuck in Angband and the Union guarding the lands of Beleriand. Now it was just a matter of who would make the first move. By 472, the Union had formulated a plan. The Union would be divided into two armies, that of East, consisting of the Sons of Feanor, the Easterlings and the Dwarves of Belegost, and of West, consisting of the Elves of Hithlum, the men of Dor Loman, the men of Brethil, the Elves of the Falas, the company from Nargothrond, and Mablung and Beleg from Doriath. The Eastern army, led by Maedhros, would march forth across Anfalglyph, drawing forth Morgoth's armies from Angband. Once Morgoth's armies had taken the bait, the hidden Western army, led by Fingon, would suddenly attack from Ered Wevrin, crushing Morgoth's armies between a hammer and anvil, similar to the Dagor Aglareb over 400 years earlier. The result would be a decisive victory which would see the threat of Morgoth ended either for good, or at least for centuries to come. However, there was just one problem with this plan. A major problem. Morgoth knew it. The Dark Lord of Angband had plenty of spies, and from his perspective, Maedhros had made a mistake. By aggressively retaking lost lands years before the actual assault, Maedhros had revealed his intentions, and most importantly the strength of his armies, causing Morgoth to realise that Maedhros relied heavily on his Dwarven and Easterling allies, and some of these allies were less loyal than Maedhros realised. Thus, Morgoth's true focus was on the Western army, that led by Fingon. The lands of Hithlum had long been a thorn in his side since the very beginning, and only by destroying the elves and men that lived there could Morgoth truly have unlimited access to the rest of Beleriand. Even as Fingon and Maedhros finalised their own plans, Morgoth made plans of his own that would throw the Union's plans into disarray before the battle even started. These plans would see both the eastern and western armies surrounded and destroyed far from the safety of their fortresses. The numbers for the battle are mostly unknown, but we can make educated guesses based on what we do know. Morgoth's forces were likely in the hundreds of thousands, perhaps not as many as during the Battle of Sudden Flame, but still likely above 250,000. For the Elves and Edain, I've split the numbers between the armies. For the Western Army, 20,000 Elves of Hithlum led by High King Fingon, 12,000 men of Dol-Lomin under Hurin, 8,000 Elves of the Falas under Lord Círdan, 6,000 men of Brethil under Haldir, 2,000 Elves of Nargothrond under Gwyndor, and Mablung and Belek from Doriath, for a total of around 45 to 50,000. For the Eastern Army, 15,000 Elves led by Maedhros, 7,000 Easterlings under Ulfang, 5,000 Easterlings under Bor, 8,000 Dwarves of Belegost under King Azaghal, for a total of around 30 to 35,000. Altogether, the Union of Maedhros numbered somewhere between 75 to 85,000 warriors. And before I jump into this battle, I want to briefly mention that there are actually two versions of this battle. In this video, I'll be going over the Silmarillion version of the battle, the most well-known version, but I'll briefly explain the second version of the battle afterwards, which features in Children of Hurin. On the 21st of June, 472, the Union was prepared. In the hills of Eredwevern and in the fortress of Barad Eifel, the Western Army waited for Maedhros to march forth. Instead, they were met by another surprise. From the south emerged Turgon, leading a 10,000-strong army from Gondolin, greatly increasing the strength of the Western Army. This was a massive surprise, and further served to strengthen their morale. Yet as the morning dragged on, it became clear that something was wrong. Unbeknownst to them, Maedhros' army had been delayed by Uldor, one of Ulfang's sons, who warned Maedhros that Morgoth had already marched forth from Angband to meet them. For one reason or another, this caused Maedhros to wait and delay his march. As it turned out, the report was partially true. An army from Angband had set forth, but had moved southwest towards Barad Eifel. The commander of that army had one very specific order: draw Fingon's army forth from Eredwevern at any cost, and Morgoth was willing to pay a high price, as this army was poorly armed and armoured, serving only as bait to get Fingon's army away from the protection of the mountains. Morgoth's army reached the outer defences of Barad Eifel, taunting the elves upon the walls, but still, Fingon's army did not take the bait. Finally, the orcs brought forth Gelmir, an elf of Nargothrond who had been captured during the Battle of Sudden Flame, and they brutally executed him before the walls of the fortress. It just so happened that Gwyndor, commander of Nargothrond's forces and brother of Gelmir, had been stationed in the outer defences. The elves of Nargothrond suddenly broke rank and charged, driving deep into Morgoth's army. Immediately afterwards, the hills came alive as Fingon's army surged forth, carving through Morgoth's army like it was nothing. Before Morgoth could reinforce his bait army, it was swept away, but more importantly than that, Fingon had taken the bait. With just a little subterfuge, Morgoth had already ruined a plan years in the making. The fury of Fingon's army was so great that they quickly reached the walls of Angband, and Gwyndor and his company broke through the outer gates, slaughtering the guards in Angband's courtyards. They then attempted to break into the fortress, and it said that Morgoth trembled as the elves pounded on the doors above his throne room. However, Fingon and Gwyndor had fallen into the trap, and tens of thousands of orcs poured out of Angband's hidden gates, driving Fingon's army away from Angband. Inside Angband, cut off and surrounded, Gwyndor's company was finally slain, except for Gwyndor himself, who was taken prisoner. For 3 days and 3 nights, Fingon's army battled Morgoth's endless hordes upon the sands of Anfalglith. But slowly, yet surely, Morgoth began to gain the upper hand. On the 4th day, Fingon's army began its bloody retreat across Anfalglith towards Eredwevern, Morgoth's army surging forward on all sides. The men of Brethil held the rear guard, but paid dearly with their own blood, losing their chieftain Haldir as well as his younger brother Hundar. Yet this was all in vain, and as the 5th day fell to night, Fingon's army was completely surrounded, still far from the safety of the mountains, and as each hour passed, the encirclement grew smaller and smaller. But with dawn came new hope for the survivors. Turgon's army, which had been stationed in reserve and had not charged forth, finally arrived from the south, and their phalanx punched a hole through Morgoth's lines. And a mere 3 hours later, the trumpets of Maedhros' army finally filled the air, and the sons of Feanor assailed Morgoth's army in the rear, and some of Morgoth's orcs began to falter and flee. However, Morgoth once again proved to be a cunning strategist, for he'd left his most dangerous forces in reserve, and now he emptied Angband of them. Glaurung came forth with his dragons, Gothmog came forth with his Balrogs, and out came Morgoth's elite forces, strengthened by trolls and wolf riders. Just as Fingon and Maedhros' forces were about to link up, Glaurung came between them, sweeping them apart as neither men or elves had an answer to Dragon's fire. Fingon's losses had been severe, but Turgon and Maedhros' forces were fresh, and now the battle hung in the balance. And maybe, just maybe, the Union of Maedhros could have emerged victorious, if not for one of the greatest betrayals in the history of Middle-earth. Suddenly, Ulfang's Easterlings turned traitor in the middle of the battle. Some of them fled, but many more of them switched sides, stabbing their allies in the back, both literally and figuratively. More hostile Easterlings came down from the eastern hills, and Maedhros' army found itself being attacked on 3 different sides. Although the men of Bor remained true to the Sons of Feanor, it was not enough, and Maedhros' army disintegrated a mere hour or 2 after properly joining the battle. The Sons of Feanor were all wounded during the rout, but none of them were slain, largely due to the heroic actions of the dwarves of Beleriand. Far more resistant to fire than elves and men, the dwarves surrounded Glaurung, hacking at him with axes until Glaurung struck down King Azagal, and as Azagal died, he stabbed Glaurung in the belly, causing the dragon to flee the battle, and most of his monstrous brood went with him. The dwarves of Beleriand then began their retreat, bearing the body of their fallen king as they went. It's worth mentioning that Ulfang and his sons paid dearly for their betrayal. Although we don't know the fate of Ulfang, we know that Ulwarth and Ulfast were slain by Bor and his sons, and that Uldor himself was killed by Maglor. With the utter defeat of Maedhros' army, Fingon's army was now assailed by tides of foes thrice the number that was left to them. Gothmog himself led the renewed assault, driving Turgon and Hurin's forces to the south towards the Fen of Serech, and surrounding what remained of Fingon's army. Fingon's remaining forces were cut down until at last only Fingon remained, and like Feanor had done nearly 500 years ago, he fought Gothmog, but another Balrog came up behind Fingon and wrapped him in his fiery whip. Then Gothmog brought down his axe, slaying Fingon with a single blow, ending the life of the 4th High King of the Noldor. The battle was now well and truly lost, and the remains of the once mighty Western army rallied under Turgon and Hurin near the entrance of the Pass of Sirion. There, Hurin and his younger brother, Hjor, convinced Turgon to escape with his army back to Gondolin. With reluctance, Turgon agreed, and he gathered the remnants of the army and fled south through the pass. As they escaped to safety, one of the most heroic sacrifices of Middle-earth's history took place, as the surviving men of Dor Loman retreated, step by step, until they reached the stream of Rivil, and there they held their ground as Morgoth's forces swarmed around them. As the sun set in the west, the last survivors were being cut down. Hjor was shot dead by a poisoned arrow, and at last, Hurin stood alone, and wielding his axe two-handed, he slew 70 orcs until at last he was buried beneath the dead. Then Gothmog took him prisoner, but perhaps it would have been best if he had simply died that day. In the end, the sacrifice of the men of Dor Loman had at least been worth something, as Turgon and his army escaped back to Gondolin, and Morgoth could not pursue him. With Hurin's capture, the battle was officially over. Morgoth's victory had been decisive, and the strength of the Union of Maedhros was completely and utterly broken. Although Morgoth would have taken heavy casualties, comparatively, he did much better than the Union. Of the Elves of Hithlum and the men of Dor Loman, none returned to their homeland. Of the Elves of Nargothrond, they were slain to the last, except for Gwyndor, who was enslaved. Of the men of Brithil, only 3 men ever returned, only because they were nursed to health by Mablung and Beleg of Doriath. The only Western army forces that escaped somewhat intact was Turgon's army, which also consisted of some of the survivors of Fingon's army, as well as the elves of the Falas under Círdan. In the east, Maedhros' army fared a little better, but their strength was broken too. At least several thousand followers of the Sons of Feanor survived, but they would no longer pose a threat to Morgoth. However, the Easterlings of Bor were seemingly entirely wiped out, and what remained of Belegost's army retreated into their mountain city. All of the Union's slain were piled into a massive hill in the centre of Enfalglith, Haud en Nirnaeth, the Hill of the Slain, and amidst the dusty, barren plains of Enfalglith, that was the only place where grass grew again. So that's nice, I guess. Why live when you can become a nice green hill? The losses were so high that simply nothing remained of Hithlum and Dor Loman's defenders, and that land was simply taken by Morgoth and given to the Easterlings, which the Easterlings weren't too happy about. The fortresses of Barad Eifel and Minas Tirith fell, and the Pass of Sirion was once again opened up, and the short-lived recovery of Dorthonion came to a quick end. In the east, the Sons of Feanor abandoned their stalwart fortress of Himring, fleeing to Assyriand in the south, and Maglor's Gap and the Pass of Aglon were once again seized by Morgoth's armies, opening up all of the southern lands to his ravaging hordes. With all of the North's defenders either dead or in hiding, the rich lands of Beleriand were now truly opened up to Morgoth in ways not seen since before the First Age. Defeat of the elves and the Undying was more or less complete on a strategic level, and now would come the mopping up. But that's a story for the next episode. Earlier in the video, I spoke of an alternative version of the battle. This version of the battle was included in the Children of Hurin book, and although the outcome and consequences of the battle are the exact same, the way the battle unfolds is a little different. In this version, Maedhros is not delayed by Uldor, and his army sets forth first, just as planned, and Morgoth sends forth a second army to deal with Maedhros, instead of just sending the one army to deal with Fingon. In this battle, the Union is defeated much easier, as Maedhros and Fingon's armies never even get close to each other, and Morgoth never seems to be in danger of losing. In the Silmarillion version, it's very much stated that the Union could have won the battle had the Easterlings not turned traitor, but in the latter version, those lines are removed. Christopher Tolkien speculated why his father changed this, and came to the conclusion that his father made the change because he felt the Union did far better in the battle than it actually should have. The change in the Children of Hurin version was to make it clear that the Battle of Unnumbered Tears was a doomed venture from the start, and that the Union never really had a chance of winning. Personally, I like some elements of this version better. Specifically, I find it far better that Maedhros wasn't delayed, as in the original version. The delay doesn't really make a lot of sense, and it makes Maedhros far more incompetent than he should be. Thank you for watching. I know it's a far longer episode than normal. That's because the Battle of Unnumbered Tears has an entire chapter dedicated to it, and Tolkien goes into pretty great detail as to what actually happens during the battle, which is something he doesn't really do with a lot of other battles. And there's a reason for that, but I'm not going to talk about that now, because I've kept you around for long enough. So thank you, farewell, and remember, if you have a plan, maybe don't do the exact opposite of what the plan says.